I've got a problem. Every time I see a mundane object doing its thing, right, performing its design task, I look at it and I just think, how can I spend a ridiculous amount of time and effort turning this into my next fantasy obsession? And that is how I ended up stealing my own humidifier for this ridiculous upgrade. The plan is to take this totally ordinary humidifier and turn it into something extraordinary. You know, why settle for vapor when it could be dragon's breath? After taking a look at the interior workings and finding them to be pretty simple, I decided to just embrace my ignorant confidence and plow ahead. Now, you're living in the future, right? So you already know which direction this build took. But I had to start by deciding which dragon was worthy of this build. There's Drogon, incredible creature design. Toothless, my kids would love that. Alduin, Saphira, Spyro, Deathwing, the list goes on forever. Let me know in the comments what other dragons you think that I should have considered. But in the end, my heart settled on Smaug the Magnificent. Nope. Not that Smaug, that adaptation was less than magnificent. And not that Smaug either, though I was sorely tempted. I decided to go with the original, straight from the source. I'll be sculpting my humidifier into Tolkien's own illustration of Smaug. As to not reinvent the wheel, I'll be using this case as the base that Smaug will be perched upon with his golden hoard underneath. But before I start making alterations to this, I want to do a test to see if the mist can actually be redirected as desired. I figured I could cover the top of it with some tape, poke a hole in and add a straw, and then funnel all that mist outside of that straw. Started to work pretty great, however, I ran into a major issue. After I let it run for a little while, the condensation would build up inside of the small straw and it would cut off any of the mist and air rising out of the straw, which is obviously not going to work. Remember me talking about that ignorant confidence? Well, running into this problem really had me feeling way more ignorant and way less confident. My plan was to funnel the mist through a straw or metal tube that I sculpted out through the body of the dragon. Before discussing the solution that I think I've come up with, I need to explain a bit of the constraints that we have with this specific humidifier. This is an ultrasonic humidifier, which means it has this small disc that vibrates at a frequency that shatters the water into a cool mist. The fan on the bottom sucks air in and pushes it out through this hole into the vapor chamber, which pressurizes that chamber, forcing all the mist up and out the top. The only way that this works though, is if this case is seated on top, sealing it and driving that airflow. So my solution is this. Rather than having a straw of small diameter come out and bend through the body of the dragon and give it more opportunities for that condensation to build up, I'm going to make a very short stint of straw that's going to be drilled down essentially where the dragon's nose is going to end up. So because of the case and the air pressure that we're dealing with, that straw will have to go all the way through. I can't just drill a hole through this and then plug that. That was my initial thought, but I do have to have a short straw that's sealed on both ends to maintain that air pressure and still drive it out of that straw. Is this going to work? Let's find out. If I set this light here, and I stand here, you should be able to see it's working. Oh, I was worried that would not work, but I think that'll be the solution. It did put the head up a little bit higher than I wanted, but I can work with that. Editor Luke here real quick. I realized that I just explained a short straw, you're seeing a long one. I do cut that down, but I never explained it, so that was just for testing purposes. All right, with that major hurdle out of the way, there's nothing stopping us from diving in and building out this base. I built out most of the volume of this mound that Smaug will be perched upon out of foam, and the last thing to do with this mound is to fill in some of these gaps and build out that last layer of gold. Now, the best way I know to make something look like gold is just to use the real thing. So I don't want to flex on anyone, but I'm going to be building out these final layers of gold by using real gold. Now, I don't mean this gold leaf, that stuff's fake. I mean real gold. If you ever found yourself stranded during COVID, you know what I mean. Mixing that toilet paper with water and glue, I create a sculptable pulp that I can then add to the base and start filling in the gaps, as well as adding some texture and really forming out this golden hoard. Time has passed, And I've successfully turned that concoction into what I can only describe as day-old scrambled eggs. That's exactly what this pile looks like. I've got one final layer here that still needs to dry, but while it's drying, I'm going to put this to the side and begin working on what for me is definitely the most daunting portion of this whole build, the sculpting. The reason this is so intimidating for me is I've only ever seriously attempted sculpting twice in my life. Both examples you can see before you. This one turned out all right, but it's an anatomy sculpt that, doesn't have any character or expression. This one wasn't good enough to keep from smushing it back into its original form. Now this is oil-based clay, and that allows you to forever work it. So I could actually pull this apart and still use that same clay. This is not what I'll be doing my final sculpt of, but it does work perfectly to make a sketch or a 3D sketch of the finished product. So I'm going to take this clay and turn it into that sculpt. The sketch is intended to make all my mistakes early, right? Figure out the proportions and things like that. And I think I've learned everything I need to from this little guy, so I'm gonna grab the polymer clay and get started on the final sculpt. And by that I mean sit down on my computer panicking and watch 3 more hours of sculpting tutorials. Huge shout out to C. Bush for all of his help answering my questions on his live streams, the incredible amount of educational content that he has available. Check him out if you haven't. I could not have done this sculpt without him. I start by pulling out some thin wire, which is great, except thin wire has the structural integrity of cooked spaghetti. So to fix that, I clamp it into a drill, twist the thin wire into tighter, thicker wire, and suddenly it's doing real structural work, instead of just suggesting support. Using my sketch as reference, I bend this thicker wire into the dragon's base structure. Once I have the spine, I add more wire. Front legs, back legs, slowly supporting spots that would snap suddenly later if I ignored them now. This is the skeleton stage where supportive structure supersedes sensible shape, and it looks absolutely nothing like a dragon. Now, to give this poor creature some mass, I wrap the whole thing in tin foil. Crumpling foil creates quick convincing volume, filling fake fullness fast without wasting clay where it won't be seen. With the shape bulked out, it's finally time for clay. I'm using cosclay for careful clay coverage, creating a cooperative core I can confidently carve into later. Not sculpting details yet, just building a clean, continuous base. Think of this like priming a canvas, except the canvas might stab you if you're careless. Once everything is covered, smooth, and only slightly lumpy, the whole thing goes into the oven at 275 degrees to bake. That sets the surface, stabilizes the structure, and leaves me with something solid to sculpt on. While that first layer of the body's baking, I'm going to start on the head. I think this is going to be the most fun, it's got the most expression. It's one of the reasons why I picked this specific design to sculpt anyways, is that I really love the expression on Smaug's face, and I love the way that Tolkien illustrated it. So I'm going to start on that head and then I'll tie it together with the body later. I start by blocking in a simple head-shaped mask. Nothing detailed yet, just enough clay to suggest size, weight, and attitude. From there I add 2 rough blobs to push the facial planes forward, followed by a few more for the nose. At this stage, everything looks bad, so I press on undeterred and start shaping the mouth. I want the expression to feel right, so I check it against my reference, quickly realizing how far off I am. That means major course corrections, coaxing curves, forcing forms into reluctant submission until the shape finally starts to cooperate. With the mouth behaving itself, I move on to the eyes. I carve in shallow cavities first, then press in 2 carefully sized clay shapes to seat the eyes where they belong. Getting them aligned early helps avoid the classic problem of sculpting a dragon who looks deeply confused. Once the eyes are set, I roll out thin, soft worms of clay and ease them into clean, cooperative curves to form the eyelids. Small shapes, slow pressure, subtle symmetry. The nose gets another pass here too, softening shapes, sharpening structure, and syncing it back up with the smile. When the head finally starts to feel expressive, I move on to the ears. Big, dramatic dragon ears. After attaching those and blending them into place, this starts to feel like an actual character, which is the perfect time to stop. Check proportions, and step away before I inevitably overwork it. Alright, I think I'm just about ready to bake this, but I want to add a little bit of texture that isn't in this reference image. It looks pretty smooth when we come around the head, but I think adding some noise, some texture to that face is really going to tie it in. I won't go full scales, but I've gone ahead and created this bumpy texture tool that'll allow me to easily add some quick texture to push this a little bit further, and then from that point, I think I'm ready to tie this into the rest of the body. And by that I mean finishing off the finer facial features. That signature tongue, spiked, slithering, and slightly threatening, those sharp little teeth peeking out from the lower lip, and a line of subtle spine ridges running back from the brow, just enough to push the silhouette from face into dragon. Once this is done, I finally bring the head and body together, carefully uniting it with the still somewhat lumpy mass that currently qualifies as a dragon torso. A bit of blending, a few structural adjustments, and suddenly it stops feeling like two separate problems and starts looking more like one complete creature. With the base body built out, it's time to start selectively sculpting what seems like a truly unreasonable number of scales, and since I've clearly leaned a little hard into the alliteration up to this point, I'm going to stop talking now and let you watch in peace. It is time to address this base, so I'll start by carving the whole thing to look more like stone, 3D print some dwarven architecture to add to the corners and this front, which is also going to serve as the control panel once the whole thing's buried under a golden horde. Finally give it a paint job, and we're looking good. That's the bottom base pretty much finished. Now I just need to take this top base and make it look a lot less like scrambled eggs and more like gold.
Treasure. Oh yes, the wealth of many kings and dwarves. What is it but fuel for my fire, for my pride? The treasure of the dwarves, the gems, gold and silver, all are mine.
Too dramatic? Probably. Much like the reference, I went ahead and kind of alluded to a golden horde here. Obviously, this doesn't look like a pile of golden coins. So I went ahead and added a few 3D prints that I painted to kind of suggest that, mimicking this illustration style and technique that Tolkien used in my reference. I had to then go in and bedazzle a little bit, add some gemstones, give it some color variety. It just looked a little bit too bland. With the horde finish, there's only one thing left we need to bring to life, and that's the dragon himself. Painting this is not about inventing a color scheme, it's about honoring the illustration. Tolkien's Smaug is made up of 3 basic colors, so I start by painting in those base tones. The red, orange, and cream are going to do most of the heavy lifting. They quickly push this from a flat sculpt towards a more recognizable Smaug. From there, it's a slow layering of details, painting the nails, ears, nostrils, giving special care to the eyes to try and capture that expression. I'm not trying to repaint this illustration exactly, just translate it into 3 dimensions. After the first pass of color, a wash helps darken the recesses and really further the dimensionality of this sculpture. And to finish it off, a dry brush layer to subtly lift the highlights on the scales, letting the sculpted texture finally do its job. Oh man, this is looking so sweet. I am dying to see this all put together. Let's jump to final assembly. Here it is, my ridiculous upgrade of this humidifier. I think it turned out pretty sweet. It's so satisfying to take an object and give it a narrative beyond the utility purpose that it was made for, and this does that for me. It also doesn't work nearly as good as it did when I started, so there is that. If you enjoyed this build, share it with somebody who loves The Hobbit. Be sure to check out some of my other builds and get subscribed. I'll see you in a future video.